Hey, what's going on, guys? Herman Stevens here once again. I've been trying to give you guys more content, and overall, I think it's probably a good exercise for me too. It makes me think about certain things. So today, I want to talk about the King's move. It's been sort of one of the hot topics recently. In particular, I mean, we've heard Ingen's thoughts on it, Devon's thoughts on the subject. I think Michael's typically quiet, but I guess boil it down before I go into my angle on it. You have some people, huge proponents of the King's move. One reason being that it gives you longer matches, it extends things. It takes our sport that's typically, 1 second matches, and it can give you matches that are a minute consistently. And you can even get the 8-minute, 10-minute matches that I think we've seen with Jerry and Michael Todd. So that's one thing. I guess that's kind of cool. Then you have the other proponents of it who are typically older arm wrestlers who've probably deteriorated to a certain extent to where they do not have full range of motion in their arms, and they stand to benefit from the King's move. So you have those types of supporters, and maybe there's no right or wrong, but it's just interesting to understand the drivers behind some of the comments people make. On that note about arms that deteriorate, my arm has lost range of motion in my 10 years, and I think it's going to continue to happen. In particular, if I go to an event or a tournament and I have really hard matches, my arm will begin to swell and lock up mid-match. And I don't mean lock up like, but the range of motion, which you probably can't see here, this is normal, and this is not necessarily a good angle, but like mid-match, it'll probably get to about here. And I don't think it means that it can't be straightened, but I'm going to tell you I assume it'd be very difficult to make it straight. I would hate for someone to make it straight if I actually decided to King's move or get and stay stretched out to that point. In particular, I pulled Robbie Burnett in the summer of 2018, and I've never beaten Robbie Burnett. It's a very tough match for me, but after losing to him early on, we met back in the finals, and I said, I'm going to, lock up everything I possibly can to somehow stop Robbie Burnett. And so, I got all the weird positions and angles, and Robbie pulled through everything. It was incredibly painful, and my arm probably did not go straight for at least 30 days. It was probably somewhere in this angle or this position, a large portion of that 30 days. And during that 30 days, it was me every day rubbing the arm, massaging the arm, using weights to straighten the arm, and progressing to higher weights as the pain eased up out of the match or after the match. So, there's a legitimate place for people who have decreased range of motion and some of these issues. There's a legitimate reason why they would support the King's move, because you don't want to necessarily quit arm wrestling. As my range of motion shortens, I would hate to think that I get to a certain point and I have to simply quit because for some reason, let's say my bicep doesn't work and I'm forced to sort of hang outside like this here. So interesting perspective. In particular, I think to some extent, Devon has seemed to deteriorate over the years, injuries, surgeries, all that stuff. Seems like he's a lot more reliant on the King's move, possibly because maybe his bicep doesn't hold as well. I don't know. Detractors of the King's move typically, will say, well, they'll throw the rule book at it. You can't go under the table, but you can King's move above the table. So even if you implement and enforce the rules, that doesn't necessarily fix the problem, nor do I think that's the issue. And Devon would say the same. Typically, or the biggest reason I think people have a problem with the King's move is that it's reliant on, you know, a bone lock or deformity or a shortened range of motion that not everyone has, and I guess would be difficult to choose to achieve. So yeah, so, you know, for instance, if let's say you're a hooker and some guy King's moves you, burns you out, and you lose to this guy all the time, what's your option? I mean, do you shorten your range of motion and you do the King's move also? I think that's kind of the dilemma with a lot of people. It seems to be unfair. It's non-muscular, although we do use other joint locks. When you ever see a deep hooker, you know, they kind of get in this position. I mean, you are using your muscles, but you're also using the joint. Michael Todd would say that even though he's stretched out, he's still using his muscles. Personally, I mean, there's, you know, it's kind of weird. So I spoke to Devon on the subject, and we got into a few points on the King's move. This was on the Arm TV Armathon that we did on New Year's Day. I think I was on for about 6 hours. And in particular, you know, some of the questions I had were regarding, you know, what sport allows a competitor to somewhat progress, get better, and become the world's best based on a disability, right? And I would say that a shortened range of motion is a disability. You know, people can't reach above their head, all this stuff like that. And I don't know if I can think of one. I mean, boxing, I mean, typically if you mess your hands and wrists up and you break them, you're probably a worse boxer. If you get head damage and that sort of thing, that probably makes you a worse boxer. You don't tend to benefit from these injuries. Any sort of running sport, football, basketball, you hurt something, it typically makes you worse. I don't see another sport, not that I know all the sports. There may be some non-American sport I'm unfamiliar with that allows a disabled person or some injury to benefit the person. So I guess the kind of question I had for Devon is should I allow my arm to heal in a shortened range of motion to get better at arm wrestling? And I think Devon said something along the lines of, depends on what you're willing to sacrifice. And that answer is not surprising from Devon. Excuse me. Because he's one of those individuals who he goes all out, no limits, all that good stuff. He'll break his arm, you know, if it came to it. So to answer that question with depends on what I'm willing to sacrifice. Again, I say, what sport puts athletes in a position where they have to question if they will allow themselves to be disabled to become better arm wrestlers? You know, and Devon argued that he was a better arm wrestler without the King's move before he was injured, maybe 2010 Devon or something. Interestingly enough, I was watching one of Uncle John's podcasts with Travis Bagent, which is from a few months ago, I think. And Travis said that arm wrestling is constantly evolving. People keep getting better. And the Devon of today would kill the Devon back then. So that's interesting. So I guess it may be debatable that Devon's comment is correct, that he was better then than he is now, and that the King's move did not make him a better arm wrestler. We discussed Michael Todd. You know, I wasn't necessarily around during Michael Todd's climb. I started in 2010, and I guess I saw a portion of that. But if you look at Michael in early 2000s, mid 2000s, prior to using the King's move or mastering the King's move, very good arm wrestler, world level arm wrestler, I think he placed second at the WAF Worlds once. Devon mentioned that he pulled Vovoda, but he didn't beat Vovoda. So someone else could have simply pulled Vovoda, right? And this is not picking on Michael. I could have pulled Vovoda and lost also. And I'm not saying that I can do anything with any version of Michael in history, but I don't think Michael was on a trajectory or had a tool set to be the #1 best arm wrestler in the world prior to the King's move. And Michael has arguably been the #1 arm wrestler over the last 10 years. Many years he was probably #1. There's probably a few years where he wasn't #1, losing to Dennis. And he lost to Devon way early, like 2010, 2011. But most years, I think Michael was #1. So he's probably the best arm wrestler of the last 10 years. He wasn't on that sort of trajectory prior to the King's move. So arguably, the King's move made Michael Todd the best in the world. Arguably, the King's move has made Devon better. At minimum, I think it's extended his career at the level he's at. Crazy George, what strength sport allows or favors a 70-year-old man to perform at the level that George has performed at? Again, I'm not really saying what's right or wrong. But it's very interesting. So I think the King's move has actually made people. It is special. It is a special advantage. There's something unique about it. I don't think it's simply another tool in the toolbox. And so again, I guess what am I willing to sacrifice? I think it's an odd scenario where one of the best arm wrestlers in history is willing to entertain disabling yourself, to get better at arm wrestling. Right? I don't think that exists in any other sport. Not that arm wrestling has to conform to other sports. Maybe that's what makes arm wrestling special and unique. But it's very interesting that I guess I could choose to not rehab my arm and just take another level up in arm wrestling. The next time Robbie snaps my arm off, I could just let it heal in a very tight angle and potentially become unbeatable. And again, going forward, as more people watch the Devons and the Michaels and the Georges, I think you'll have people. There's going to be somebody that's going to make the decision, and it won't simply be, okay, well, here's where the lock ended up. It ended up here. Someone's just going to let it stay like this. And I don't know exactly how Crazy George's situation came about. But his is a much tighter angle. So things to think about. I think it's a really unique discussion. It really does set arm wrestling apart from other sports. And I think if you're trying to stage arm wrestling as a sport, it might be something we need to work out, because something's a little weird about it. And I think to some extent, new audiences probably like it and hate it at the same time. There's different people see it differently. I mean, some people like longer matches, but I'm pretty sure a lot of people see it and go, okay, well, how is this arm wrestling? How is laying with your arm straight out arm wrestling? And I think it's unfortunate that, some of the bigger names in arm wrestling are using their platforms to sort of brainwash the masses or school the masses or manipulate the masses, because they are the first contact with some of these new people. And then they get to sort of color arm wrestling or set up arm wrestling in the way that benefits them, forever. So something to think about. I want to hear your thoughts, and not necessarily just, do you like the King's move or hate the King's move, or is it good or is it bad? But what do you think about the idea that one may have to consider choosing to let their arm heal in a disabled position to be a better arm wrestler? Thanks, guys.